February 5, 1944. 12,000 feet above the Adriatic Sea, the winter sun cut sharp and cold through the canopy glass. A formation of B-17 flying fortresses droned northward toward their target, Regensburg, deep in the heart of the Reich. Inside those aluminum giants, American boys gripped their gun mounts, their breath frosting in the thin air, their eyes scanning the pale horizon for the black specks that always came. Behind them, still climbing through the cloud breaks, came something the Luftwaffe had never seen before, a squadron of P-51 Mustangs with tails painted the color of arterial blood. In the ready rooms of Jagdgeschwader 27, barely 200 miles northeast, young German pilots gathered around their mission boards with the easy confidence of men who had owned these skies for years. They had flown against the British over Malta, strafed Soviet columns at Kursk, and sent countless American bombers spiraling into the fields of Bavaria and Austria. They knew the patterns, the weaknesses, the exact moment when American escort fighters reached the limit of their range and turned back, leaving the bombers naked and alone. That moment was coming soon. It always did. But this morning, someone mentioned a rumor, something about Negro pilots, about colored men in fighter planes. The room erupted in laughter. One pilot, a veteran with 14 kills painted beneath his cockpit, stubbed out his cigarette and said what they were all thinking. The Americans are so desperate they're sending their servants to fight us. They had no idea they were about to meet the Tuskegee Airmen. And they had no idea that everything they believed about racial superiority, about the natural order of the warrior caste, about who could and could not master the brutal calculus of air combat at 400 miles per hour, all of it was about to be shattered in a hail of 50 caliber bullets at 20,000 feet. The story of the 332nd Fighter Group begins not in the sky, but in the suffocating weight of American contradiction. This was a nation that sent its sons to die for democracy in Europe while enforcing apartheid at home. In 1941, when the United States entered the war, its military was strictly segregated. The Army Air Corps, considered the most technologically advanced and prestigious branch of service, had never trained a single black pilot. The prevailing belief, held even by generals and congressmen, was that Negroes lacked the intelligence, reflexes, and courage necessary for aerial combat. It was spoken in briefing rooms and written in official memoranda. Some men were born to fly, and others were born to serve those who did. But pressure was building. Civil rights organizations, black newspapers, and Eleanor Roosevelt herself began demanding that the military open flight training to African Americans. In 1941, under political pressure it could not ignore, the War Department established a segregated training program at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. The intention was never equality. The intention was appeasement, a token program that could be quietly shuttered when these men inevitably failed. The quotas were small, the standards impossibly high, the resources deliberately limited. Every white officer involved expected it to collapse under the weight of its own premise. But the men who arrived at Tuskegee arrived with something the planners had not accounted for, a burning need to prove the lie wrong. They were college graduates and sharecroppers' sons, men who had been told their entire lives that they were inferior, that the cockpit of a fighter plane was as far beyond their reach as the surface of the moon. They studied navigation until their eyes bled. They practiced gunnery until their fingers cramped. They flew training missions in worn-out biplanes that white cadets had already discarded, and when those planes fell apart in the Alabama sky, they climbed into the next one. The washout rate was brutal, but those who survived did so with test scores and flight marks that matched or exceeded their white counterparts. In March 1942, the first 5 black pilots earned their wings. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of the Army's only black general, led them. They were called the Tuskegee Airmen, and they were about to be sent into a war that did not believe in them. For 2 years, they fought 2 wars. The first was in North Africa and Sicily, where they flew ground attack missions in P-40 Warhawks, strafing German convoys and defending Allied positions. They performed competently, courageously, but they were given the least glamorous assignments: mud work, close air support, coastal patrols. The glory missions, the bomber escorts deep into Germany where pilots earned their reputations and their medals, those went to white squadrons. The Second War was the one they fought every day on the ground. In their own country's military bases, they were denied entry to officers' clubs. They trained on equipment deemed unfit for white units. They read letters from home describing lynchings and race riots while they bled for a flag that did not protect them. And they endured the whispers, the cruel nickname that followed them from base to base, the Tuskegee Experiment. As if their lives were laboratory data, as if their valor was a hypothesis awaiting disproof. Then, in early 1944, everything changed. The 15th Air Force, based in Italy, was hemorrhaging bombers on deep penetration raids into Germany and the Balkans. Losses were catastrophic. Some missions saw 20, 30, even 40 aircraft shot down before they reached their targets. Escort fighters could only go so far before fuel limitations forced them home, and German interceptors had learned to wait, circling like wolves, patient and efficient. The bomber crews were terrified. They needed every fighter group available, regardless of the color of the men flying them. In January 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group, now flying the nimble, long-range P-51 Mustang, was assigned full-time bomber escort duty. Their tails were painted red for easy identification. They were told their job was simple: stick with the bombers. Do not chase kills. Do not break formation for personal glory. Protect the heavies at all costs. The German pilots who first encountered the red tails expected easy prey. The Luftwaffe's elite were some of the most experienced combat pilots in the world. Many had been flying since Spain in 1936, had hundreds of missions over Poland, France, and Russia. They knew how American fighter pilots thought: aggressive, individualistic, always hunting for aces and medals. The standard tactic was to send a small group of fighters to bait the escorts away from the bombers, then swarm the undefended formation with Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s. It worked nearly every time. So when they saw the red-tailed Mustangs, saw them holding position in tight, disciplined formation, they assumed it was inexperience. They assumed fear. They dove in expecting a slaughter. What they got instead was a wall of coordinated fire. The Tuskegee pilots did not break. They did not chase. They flew in elements of 2 and 4, covering each other with textbook precision, weaving around the bombers in defensive screens that were almost impossible to penetrate. When German fighters tried to slash through the formation, the red tails met them head-on, their Mustangs rolling and snapping into firing position with reflexes honed by years of having to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. 50 caliber tracers stitched across the winter sky. FW-190s erupted into flame and tumbled wingless toward the earth. Bombers that should have been easy kills made it to their targets and back home again, their crews shaken but alive. The reports started filtering back to Luftwaffe command. There was something different about the fighters with red tails. They did not behave like the others. They could not be baited. They could not be separated. Mission after mission, bomber groups escorted by the 332nd came home with fewer losses. In the spring of 1944, on a raid to Berlin, not a single bomber under red tail escort was lost to enemy fighters, a record unmatched by any other fighter group in the 15th Air Force. The white bomber crews, men who had grown up in the same segregated America that told them black men were cowards and incompetents, began requesting the red tails by name. They called them red tail angels. They painted red stripes on their own aircraft to impersonate the protection. They wrote letters home describing the colored pilots who saved their lives. And in those letters, the cognitive dissonance was almost audible. How could this be true? For the German pilots, the reckoning was even harsher. They had been raised in a Reich built on the theology of racial hierarchy, told by their Führer and their teachers that the Aryan race was nature's warrior caste, biologically superior in courage, intelligence, and martial skill. The idea that black men Hitler himself had mocked in main camps, men the Nazi propagandists depicted as subhuman, could not only fly, but fly well enough to kill them, was a psychological fracture. Some refused to believe it. They blamed mechanical failure, bad luck, poor intelligence. But others, the ones who survived close encounters with the red tails and saw the calm precision with which those pilots flew, began to understand a terrible truth. Everything they had been taught was a lie. Skill was not a matter of blood. Courage was not coded in pigment. The man in the red-tailed Mustang who had just blown your wingman out of the sky was every bit the warrior you were, and maybe better, because he had clawed his way into that cockpit through a hatred far more vicious than anything you had ever faced. There is a moment, documented in the mission logs, that captures this transformation perfectly. March 24, 1945. The target was a tank works deep inside Germany, and the bomber stream stretched for miles. A large formation of German fighters, desperate now, in the dying months of the Reich, made a coordinated attack on the lead bomber group. The 332nd was there. Captain Roscoe Brown, flying his P-51C Josephine, spotted a Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, the Luftwaffe's last hope, a plane 50 miles per hour faster than anything the Allies had. The jet dove on a crippled B-17, cannons blazing. Brown pushed his throttle to the firewall, dove after it, and despite the speed disadvantage, despite the jet's technological edge, he closed the distance and fired. His rounds walked up the fuselage and into the cockpit. The Me-262, the supposed Wunderwaffe, the jet that was going to turn the tide, came apart in midair. Brown pulled up and returned to the formation. It was the first Me-262 ever shot down by a member of the 15th Air Force. The pilot was a Negro from Ohio. By the war's end, the 332nd Fighter Group had flown over 15,000 sorties. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in the air and another 150 on the ground. They sank a destroyer with machine gun fire, a feat almost unheard of for a fighter aircraft. They earned 3 distinguished unit citations, 96 distinguished flying crosses, and 14 Bronze Stars. 66 of them died in combat, their Mustangs torn apart over Austria, Yugoslavia, and Germany, their bodies buried in foreign soil far from the home that never wanted them in the sky in the first place. And yet their most staggering statistic is this. Of the bombers they escorted, only 27 were lost to enemy fighters over the course of 200 missions, a loss rate so low it defied every expectation, every statistic, every prediction made by the men who thought the Tuskegee experiment would fail. But numbers do not capture what truly happened over those burning cities and frozen mountains. What happened was a shattering of myth. For the white bomber crews who flew home under the protection of the red tails, the experience was a crack in the foundation of everything they had been taught about race. Some of them would return to America and still vote for segregation, still drink from whites-only fountains, still tell their children that colored folks were different. But they would carry with them, forever, the memory of the day their lives were saved by a black man in a red-tailed Mustang. And that memory was a seed. For the German pilots, those who survived, the lesson was even starker. The Reich's promises of superiority were ash and propaganda. They had lost not because they were outgunned or outnumbered, though they were, but because they had believed a lie about what made a man dangerous in the sky. Courage was not racial. Skill was not genetic. And the men they had been told were inferior had beaten them cleanly, mission after mission, in the only arena that mattered, survival. And for the Tuskegee Airmen themselves, the war was validation and condemnation all at once. They had proven, beyond any doubt, that they could do what they were told was impossible. They had bled and died for a country that despised them. And when they came home in 1945, they were still denied service in segregated diners, still forced to sit in the back of buses, still beaten by police in southern towns. Captain Davis, the man who led them, could not rent an apartment in Washington, D.C. because of his skin. The red-tailed angels who had saved hundreds of American lives were treated as second-class citizens the moment they took off their flight suits. It would take another 20 years, and another kind of war fought in the streets and courtrooms of America, before the country began to acknowledge what the Tuskegee Airmen had proven in blood at 20,000 feet. But here is the thing about myth. Once it is broken, it can never be fully repaired. The lie that black men could not be warriors, could not be leaders, could not be trusted with the most sophisticated machines of war, that lie died screaming in the cockpits of burning German fighters over Munich and Vienna. It died in the grateful eyes of bomber crews who made it home. It died in the mission reports filed by white squadron commanders who could not explain how the colored boys kept doing the impossible. And though the men who told that lie would spend decades trying to rebuild it, trying to pretend it never fell, the truth was already loose in the world. The red tails had flown, and the sky, once closed to them by law and hatred, would never be fully closed again. There is a photograph taken in April 1945 at Ramitelli Airfield in Italy. It shows a group of Tuskegee pilots standing in front of a P-51 Mustang, its red tail gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. They are smiling, but their eyes carry the weight of what they have done and what it has cost them. Behind them, mechanics, black men who were also told they couldn't handle complex machinery, work on another fighter, preparing it for the next mission. The war in Europe is almost over. In a few weeks, Germany will surrender. These men will go home to a country that still does not love them. But in this moment, in this photograph, they are exactly what they always were. Warriors who broke the world's expectations and remade the sky in their own image. The Germans laughed at them once. They do not laugh anymore.